Hello.
Louder.
Hey everyone, thank you for coming out and supporting decriminalization and the celebration of entheogens. So I'm Danielle. I'm the lead organizer of Decriminalize Nature Humboldt. And for those of you who don't know who we are, we've been working with the local government here in Arcata to decriminalize entheogens. So entheogens are psilocybin mushrooms, cacti that contains mescaline, ayahuasca, a plant mixture that contains DMT, and ibogaine. And so a month ago, July 21st, we met with the city council, and it was a split vote. They wanted our resolution to be seen in front of the safety committee. The safety committee, so a week later, we spoke to the safety committee. They were cool with decriminalization. They want us to be seen in front of the city council again, and that's going to be happening on the 1st of next month. And if you guys want to help out, go to the Arcata City Council website and email the council members. Yeah, so decriminalization, we would be free to grow our own medicines, gift our medicines, and gather our medicines. And selling is not part of the decriminalization model. So, yeah. So I want to give a big shout out to Jake for making this all happen. So thank you, Jake. And huge shout out for everyone who's part of this movement. So yeah, thank you to Serge, I don't see him. Thank you, Skip, Taylor, Madeline, and yeah, everyone who's like been helping out. Hopefully I'm not forgetting anyone. Yeah, if you haven't already, please check out Cyrus over at Fungi Lighting. He has some really cool stickers. And NHS is back there. And yeah, we have some awesome speakers coming up. First speaker is going to be Dr. Larry Norris. He is the co-founder of the national movement, Decriminalize Nature. So welcome, Larry.
Hello, everyone. I don't look like a doctor today, but it's okay. We're all hanging out, right? So, yeah, I just want to say thank you to everybody, to Arcata, to the Arcata community, to the Decriminalize Nature Humboldt team, and a big round of applause for Danielle, please, because she's doing amazing work. Unbelievable. This movement happened in Arcata so much faster. It's just sometimes people just say, okay, we're going to do this and make it happen. And Danielle did that, and it's been really beautiful to watch. So thank you very much for that. As she mentioned, my name is Larry Norris. I am looking for my notes, and I try not to read notes, but I made all these people a wonderful movie ahead of me, so I had to think about this. I came up from the San Francisco Bay Area today. It's much nicer up here than it is down there. A much more wonderful community up here. It's really beautiful. I had never been down to the plaza over here. It's really nice to see all the people coming together on a Sunday or Saturday. What is it, Saturday? Saturday. see what happens, right? And just connecting, and I think that's really beautiful. And I think that's part of what this movement is all about, is really coming together, connecting with each other, learning together, and really building that community. So I'm going to give you a little outline of my talk. I'm going to talk about 30 minutes, and then we'll do about 15 minutes of question and answer. If anyone has any questions, I don't know if we have a microphone. You can maybe just raise your hand and yell or something like that. We'll figure it out. But basic outline of the talk, I'll go over a little bit about my bio and some background and kind of how we got here and how far this movement's come in the last 25 years. I'm sure there's some old timers here that see how far this movement's come from even before that, but just sort of in my experience. Then I'll look a little bit about the background of Decriminalize Nature. I'll talk about how we kind of formed, the progress we've made over the last year and a half or 2 years now, just a little over 2 years, and some of our ethos, why we do the things we do, what's our approach, why are we even engaging in this conversation. And I'm going to need you to help me out with timing too, because I haven't figured that out yet. So then after that, I'm going to go into a little bit about the research, both kind of the contemporary research that's happening, and then also some of the traditional research that we hear about. Thank you. And then from there, I'm going to go a little bit into some more of the heavy material, which is basically like what things do we need to be aware of? We kind of saw what happened with cannabis, you know, and how there's this huge influx and influence of some big money kind of taking over. And we're seeing some of that same thing happen within the sacred plant fungi world as well. So just some things to be aware of, some people to be aware of, and some things that we can do as a grassroots community to make sure that we can hold on to that sacred. And then the last thing, if there's time, before we pass it off to Jen, I'm going to touch a little bit about integration. So integration is kind of a practice. How do you come together after an experience, make meaning of an experience, kind of figure out how to implement some of these insights that you had from these experiences to help with personal and spiritual growth and those types of things. And then we'll have Jen speak after that. She'll expand upon that even more. So thank you. So my bio. So who am I? Why am I even up here, right? So I started my experiences in Ann Arbor, Michigan a long time ago. I was going to school out there, and I was studying biopsychology and cognitive science, which is a little bit more on the neuronal side of things. I keep forgetting to set my timer, so. A little bit more on the neuronal side of things. That was before they called it neuroscience, biopsychology and cognitive science, right? And at the same time as I was having these experiences, I was also, at the same time as I was studying this, I was also having some of my first mushroom experiences and really having this profound exploration, expansive consciousness, healing my own personal issues, these different types of things. And I realized that nothing that I was learning in my mushroom experiences was even being represented or talked about in any of the classes. You know, this is University of Michigan, a pretty prestigious university, and they kind of missed the consciousness part, right? They're talking about, oh, this mechanistic part of the brain, all the brain consciousness is inside your brain, this is where it is, and here I'm having experiences that really expand much farther than that. So I realized there were some problems with the ways that contemporary society was looking at these experiences, and after this I would have also had to start doing a lot of animal research. So when you are having mushroom experiences and realizing that part of your sort of career path involves having to torture animals for seeing what's happening in the brain, you kind of have this sort of cognitive dissonance, right? So I took a little break from that. I decided, okay, that's not what I'm going to do. I did my graduated. I decided I wanted to kind of study this research in terms of a little bit deeper into the phenomenology or the inner experience, right? What's happening inside of these experiences? What are the visions that people are having? So I did started a road trip. Went over to, I don't know if you know, Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies. At the time, in 1998, they were a small little office in Charlotte, North Carolina, files stacked up. And they actually gave me some different researchers that were doing this research across the US. So I started this big long road trip to kind of see what was happening in the world of research. How many people here know Rick Strassman's work? Okay, a few people, yeah. So he was one of the few people that was doing research in the mid-90s. But unfortunately, I didn't get his address. But I went to visit a bunch of other professors, and everyone was hiding the research. And I was like, man, this is not the time to be doing this, because somebody's talking about, oh, I'm doing this research, but I'm not really talking about it. I'm actually doing biofeedback research, or I'm doing some other neuronal research, or this technological consciousness research. I'm not really talking about the plant medicines at all. So I decided it was not the time to jump into this research. I took about an 11-year sabbatical and moved to Hawaii, so that was nice. During that time, I came across some ayahuasca experiences, and that kind of really blew my mind in a whole other way. For me, mushrooms were really profound. Ayahuasca was really profound. The idea of plant teacher really made sense to me. The idea of a wisdom outside of myself really made sense to me. It wasn't my consciousness anymore. With mushrooms, when I was starting out, I was like, oh, I could say it was just a higher consciousness. It was just a higher sense of myself. When I had my ayahuasca experience, it was really like, wow, I really need to respect plant kingdom and plant consciousness as something that's really powerful in terms of our healing process. And so it started me on my path to go to California Institute of Integral Studies, which is in the San Francisco Bay Area. Just completed my dissertation about a year and a half ago, about 3 days before COVID lockdown, which is nice, just squeak that in there. So that was quite a great process. My dissertation was on ayahuasca experiences and the meaning-making process. I'd be happy to talk. There's some excellent resources over there about integration. Danielle and everyone as well is doing some great work with that. And if you have any questions about integration, I'd love to help you out with that as well. One of the other things I did while I was at the California Institute of Integral Studies was I created was I created ERIE, Entheogenic Research Integration Education. And so since about 2011, we've been doing peer integration circles, which is a really great way. At least a lot of people were having, even in 2011, there was a lot of people who were like, oh, why are you doing integration? People are just talking about their experience. Who cares about that? It's just ego and that type of thing. And we found that was really, really valuable for people to come together, be heard, feel each other, share experiences with each other. And so that was happening for about 10 years now. We've had quite a few peer integration circles, and so that was a big part of it. Also educational events, and I know here there's going to be a lot of that happening as we move forward with some of the city council passing. So look into the local community here and get involved with some of that and help out if you can. I really look at integration as kind of a two-step process. There's the meaning-making process, which I consider ERIE to be, and then there's the implementation process. You don't necessarily want to integrate as you're making meaning and implement those insights in daily life right away. They always say, wait about 2 weeks before making any major life decisions. Don't quit your job the next day because maybe you just need to hold on and wait a second, right? A lot of people make these really big changes and they're like, whoa, hold on, what did I just do, right? So spend some time. So I really see ERIE for me as being the meaning-making process of my life. And then I look at Decriminalize Nature as being the implementation process. How do I now take all those insights that I learned from my experiences, from other people's experiences, from working with the ERIE, and now doing actual policy change, changing the world, helping to bring people together to be able to, work with direct democracy. And I think we're talking about decriminalizing nature, but we're also talking about how do we engage with our city council? How do we engage with our elected officials? How do we remember that our elected officials work for us and not the other way around? These are things that I forgot, and this process has been really valuable in that process to learn that yes, indeed, this is how we're supposed to engage with city council. We're not supposed to wait for the big money to do it. We're not supposed to wait for some savior to come along. This is our community, and we need to come together and do it. And so I really recommend helping out the Arcata team when they come on September 1st, give some testimonials. If you haven't checked out some of, I'm guessing that they're all recorded. Check out some of the testimonials that happen. It's powerful. You can feel tears welling in your eyes from some of the stories that people tell. Same thing when we did this in Oakland. Tons of stories. 130 people came up there. And this isn't just like voting for something. When you vote for something, it's really easy to just check the box. Right? When you give testimonial, you're saying to the city council members, I broke the law and it healed me. And this is why the law is wrong. And I want you to hear that as an elected official of our community. And that's a really powerful statement. So when you see these things happening, this is happening across the US right now, it's really amazing to be a part of. So that's probably longer than I need to spend on that. The echo on this is very interesting because I'm hearing myself and talking at the same time. I'm kind of working with that, but it's okay. So thank you. So Decriminalize Nature. What is Decriminalize Nature? How do we form? So Decriminalize Nature started in December of 2018, so not that long ago. It was a group of us in Oakland that came together, and we're actually talking about how do we create conscious community? How do we come together and put together a community that can talk about all these different aspects, transpersonal psychology, health, spiritual experiences, entheogens, and things like that. In this conversation, we started talking about Denver, and they were going to pass, as you know, they passed in May of 2019, the ballot initiative, and Oregon, which was legalizing psilocybin therapy. And we're like, well, how would we do that differently in the Bay Area? What things could we improve on with what's already happening here? And so we really we're thinking, well, the legalization model is a whole different thing. There's licenses, there's taxes, there's control, there's state-run growing facilities, there's state-run protocol for how to engage with somebody in ceremony. There's no innovation there. Innovation comes from the ground up, it comes from community. And with the Denver initiative, they didn't allow for cultivation, and they only were talking about mushrooms. So we're like, let's change the narrative a little bit here. Let's talk about nature. Let's talk about our connection to nature, our relationship to nature. Let's talk about being able to grow our own plants, grow our own medicine, to be able to have this in community. And let's not just talk about mushrooms. We were lucky because we were in the Bay Area. So we're like, we know all of these communities exist. There's a mushroom community, there's an ayahuasca community, there's an ibogaine community, there's cacti community. So it wasn't a big jump for us in the Bay Area to say, hey, let's make this happen here. What's amazing is how many other cities across the US have also moved this forward, because we were told at the beginning, you're never going to pass anything. It's not going to work. You can't have people cultivating their own medicine. You can't have people, beyond mushrooms. Mushrooms is the only thing that can work, or if you do it, you're lucky in the Bay Area, but this won't happen in other places, right? So we decided to give it a try either way. So we wrote up our resolution in January of 2019. Then we ended up getting a sponsor for the resolution, was Councilmember Noel Gallo, who has a long history. Oftentimes we say, you never know when your city council is just waiting for you to ask them to pass this resolution. The council member who sponsored our resolution, his grandma was a curandera, and she had done work with healing plants for a long time. So he was like, yes, I absolutely know what you're talking about, which is kind of shocking. And almost every city that we've talked to, there's been somebody that knows of this research, that is familiar with the healing properties, that has a family member that's worked with this at some point in time. And so I think that's pretty powerful too, because the message is out there, right? It's not just something that we have to convince them anymore. This is really just like, how do we do the logistical side of things to make sure that we can have healing in our community? So we passed, as I mentioned earlier, we had about 100 people show up to our first public safety committee meeting, and really, really powerful speakers, coming from all over the place. On the second meeting on June 4th, 1 week later, they're like, we don't need you to bring 100 people to speak anymore. I think we talked to 20 people, by the way, to come into that first meeting, and 100 showed up. We didn't know the other 80 people. It could have been possible that all 80 of them had bad things to say. 99 of them were all positive, amazing. One person just actually thought it was a different agenda item, so they don't count, right? So, but pretty powerful. And even still, even after they told us, hey, you know what, we don't need that many people, the next one, 30 people showed up, and we are going to give our presentation and our testimonial about the powerful healing potentials of these plant medicines. And one potential experience that really kind of sticks with me, this one woman shared her story about how she'd be having some substance issues with heroin for about 10 years or something like that. She said, about 5 years I was ready to commit suicide. I had an iboga experience, and here's my 4-year-old daughter. And you could feel the energy in the entire room, like city council members, the whole audience, you could just feel that. That's something that's really powerful when people are coming in to give their testimonies to change policy like this. So after that, we ended up, it was June 4th, that was our final vote. We ended up getting a unanimous decision, which is pretty amazing for Oakland because it's a very diverse city council. All the city council members believe that, yes, we should decriminalize plants and fungi, and we should be able to cultivate and these types of things. That really started the process for us that we didn't expect to happen. Again, it's like, okay, we're just doing this in Oakland. It's really awesome, by the way, that Oakland passed and not San Francisco, by the way, just for my own personal enjoyment of that, because San Francisco's kind of lost its track a little bit, in terms of this area of study, but for Oakland to really step up and show the way, show leadership in this is really powerful. Since Oakland passed, we've now had passage in Santa Cruz in January 2020, pass in Ann Arbor, Michigan in September 2020. After Ann Arbor, Michigan passed, the district attorney for the county of Washtenaw County expanded that to the entire county. So now we have expanded that from just the city of Ann Arbor to the entire county. After that, Washington, D.C. passed with a 76% voter approval, which is pretty, knock your socks off in terms of voter approval. 76% of the people agreed that plants and mushrooms shouldn't be illegal. And then this year in Massachusetts, Cambridge, Somerville, and Northampton, Massachusetts have all passed DN-related policy, which is pretty amazing as well. We now have about 4 different cities that plan to pass before the end of this year. Hopefully Arcata before too long. Grand Rapids, Michigan. Detroit is going to be having a ballot initiative in November. We have teams happening in Cleveland, in Columbus, Ohio, in Oklahoma, in Austin, Texas, in Missoula, Montana. A few more places in Michigan. Michigan state legislation is going to be pushing this forward. Vermont is pushing forward some state legislation. So this movement went from 0 to 150 really quickly. And I think that we were able to tap into something from Decriminalize Nature, which is really about this connection to nature, our connection to nature, our relationship to nature. And I think that's really beautiful because it speaks to our ethos. And I'll jump a little bit into our ethos now. One of the key components of our ethos is really that we're a decentralized, transparent, and open source organization. So what that means, is that we really empower and encourage every different city community to come together to propose their own resolutions. Obviously, they can use our information as a template. It's all open source, so it's all available to them. But really, we help them be empowered to do the work. Because at the end of the day, what we're looking for is support systems that are available locally, not like a singular kind of top-down hierarchy where somebody's sort of making the decisions, but for each of those communities to emerge naturally and for them to look at sort of what are the things that are most valuable, what works here in Ann Arbor, Michigan, what works here in Oakland, what works here in Arcata, what works here in Boston. All these different places, there's going to be different sort of vibes, there's going to be different understandings of what's working, and how to sort of engage in the educational process and the integration process, and also how to engage with your city council members. And as I was mentioning earlier, now there are cities across the US, I think 7 cities have passed, 3 or 4 more are going to pass soon. About 40 cities we have total that are engaging with this process that now know how to propose something to their city council. Like, I didn't know how to do that before 2019. And that goes well beyond entheogens or, decriminalizing nature. Now this means that any action you want to take, people have the tools to know how to do that. People can propose a resolution. People can contact their city council members as members of the community and say, hey, this needs change. How can we move this forward? And so I think that's really important. One of the other aspects, obviously, Decriminalize Nature is about our reconnection to nature. And we use the word entheogen versus psychedelic. How many people have heard the word entheogen before today? Oh, okay, great, so many of you, wonderful. So we decided a long time ago when we started, rather than use the word psychedelic, which has sort of a particular cultural sort of phenomena, definition, people think of things, there's been 50 years of this understanding of what psychedelic means. Why don't we just start with a new word? So this term entheogen means sort of generating the divine within. So buried in that word is the idea of the sacred, about reverence, about sort of this inner divinity, right? And so this entheogenic experience is something that we really want to push forward. And we thought also oftentimes, entheogens, although this can be debated, refer to plants and mushrooms. Whereas psychedelics can also be synthetics. Now we don't have any problems with synthetics. We don't think anyone should go to jail for any controlled substances, but our focus was really on nature. And so we're using this term entheogen to really speak to that. You don't really call an ayahuasca ceremony with ayahuasqueros psychedelic. You don't call a buiti ceremony with iboga psychedelic, but maybe entheogen or sacred plant medicine ceremony is a good way to talk about it. So we're trying to work with that kind of angle. Page 2. Another thing that was really important for us was this grow, gather, gift model, as Daniel was mentioning earlier. So we believe that people should be able to grow their own medicines. They should be able to gather them out of the ground if they want to. They should be able to gift them in community. If somebody has a great mushroom garden, they want to engage with others. If they want to do a process around community-based practices, they should all be able to do that as well. And this is really about empowering the individual. And empowering the individual to engage with their community. As we see now, there are things like Big Pharma that are paying attention to this. There's venture capital companies that are opening every day that are trying to take this area. We'll create it into a synthetic. Oh, well, we can't. It's not sustainable to grow plants. Let's just create a synthetic and we'll give that to you instead. It's more accessible if we create synthetics, right? Well, it's because we haven't tried to grow yet. There's not an opportunity for cultivation. Let's cultivate. Let's engage with plants and mushrooms. Let's reconnect to the earth. Another thing that I think is really important is that really trying to rebuild culture that has been stripped away from humanity for not just the last 50 years of the drug war, but hundreds, if not thousands of years. All of our ancestors worked with these plants at one point in time. And that's another thing that's really important here. What's our ancestral connection to these plants? Why are we going to dismiss that ancestral connection by giving away to Big Pharma? These are sacred materials. These are materials that need reverence. And we should not dismiss, the process of our ancestors because, I don't know, you probably heard, there's a meme that was going around, I thought was pretty funny. Our ancestors learned together about these mushrooms, for example, all mushrooms. And I think the meme went something like, imagine being our ancestors and you're like, well, this mushroom tastes like beef. This mushroom killed Brian. This mushroom, did you see God for 5 days? Like all these different, like imagine being our ancestors just eating mushrooms and not knowing what it was. So really there's a whole process where we're at, thank you, where we're at to get here today is a product of our ancestral sort of exploration, right? So let's honor that in this process. And I'm gonna skip around a little bit more. So one thing I wanna touch on a little bit is research that's happening. Many of you probably know the research that's going on right now. So there's a lot of studies at Johns Hopkins, there's studies at NYU, there's studies at Harvard, there's studies at all these major universities, which by the way, have multi-million-dollar research budgets now, right? But it's okay for them to study inside, but if you go out their door, you can get arrested. So this is very interesting. They're not helping to decriminalize, they're actually just trying to get the research forward. And so, I think the research that you hear of is obviously good for PTSD, it's good for depression, it's good for anxiety, it's good for substance issues. It's also great for personal and spiritual growth, which is something I think is really important. But I think what's can be set up, and we saw this within the context of cannabis and the Controlled Substances Act, is this kind of medical recreational false dichotomy that's being set up. People assume, well, because the Controlled Substances Act, Schedule 1 is that it has to have medical value. So in order to get it off of the Controlled Substances Act, you have to prove medical value. But what happens in that process? You have to have a GMP certified synthetic. It's set up for big pharma. It's ready to go to trials. And then you lose kind of the access to the plants. The Controlled Substances Act is not set up for full botanical trials. 498 of 500 different full botanical trials have failed over the course of the many years. So it's not set up for that because it's inconsistent. It doesn't have that same sort of synthetic consistency, but that's okay. That's what these experiences are about, right? And then, as you saw with cannabis, what happens if it's not medical? It's called recreational, right? And so we probably have all had amazing recreational experiences, but from the perspective of the people who are in fear, recreational means high risk. It means partying too hard. But what about sacred experiences? Yes, they might be recreational, but does that fall into the medical recreational dichotomy? What about creativity? What about personal and spiritual growth? What about deep analysis of the self? What about mystical epiphanies? Are those also recreational? And so I think we need to really expand this out because the medical will often use that and say you have to go our route or everything else is fooling around. And we really want to broaden that conversation. So we're talking about something beyond just the medical and recreational. And again, nothing against the recreational or the medical, but let's just expand it. So I know I'm getting close on time here, so I'm gonna just jump to the next section. So in that process, I was asking a therapist once, what does recreational mean to you, right? And she said, unfacilitated. Am I getting feedback here?
Just stand a little bit more.
Okay, Lou? Better. More. Okay. Dun. Better? Okay. So you're tripping right now, right? So I was asking a therapist what she thought, recreational meant, and she basically said unfacilitated, right? And that works really well if you're a person who's facilitating because everything else is recreational. Okay, well, you have to go through me. There's this control mechanism. People are using fear right now to kind of engage in this process, and so I think this takes me to the next thing, which is like, how do we build local economies, local community infrastructures, engage with our communities so that we don't have to necessarily go through these therapists who have this particular model. And the next part I really want to talk about is things to be aware of. Or how many people are paying attention to SB 519 at the California state level? Okay, right on, a few people. Okay, so we were really behind California SB 519 for a chunk of time. Recently, before, I think they have hopefully their next thing would be in August 26th or something like that. They're on suspense file right now. But some people decided to put limits into the legislation. They took out a bunch of things, they watered it down, and now they're limiting it. But they're not going to limit the corporations, right? But they're going to limit your ability to grow plants. They're going to limit your ability to have, access to these plants to not a insignificant amount. But what limits mean is basically an opportunity for what limits means when can somebody arrest you, right? Thank you. And allowable amounts is the same thing. It sounds so nice. Oh, they're allowing us this amounts, but really, who is the opportunity? Who has the sort of the authority to go between your relationship with nature, right? And so we started looking a little deeper into who was influencing some of SB 519, and we found some of the same characters that were influencing Prop 64 with cannabis. And this is New Approach PAC. It's something that's a little concerning, and I think everyone should just be really aware. This is why what Danielle and the Arcata team is doing, why every other team out there is doing work. It's really important because engage with your local community, decriminalize on a local level, and if these things happen at the state level, at least you can be aware of it. So who is New Approach PAC? We got Facebook billionaires, we got Scott's Miracle Grow, who does Monsanto Bayer, Roundup. You have, Privateer Holdings, which is funded by, Founders Fund, which is Peter Thiel. You have Dr. Bronner Soap Company. So it's really interesting to have Dr. Bronner Soap Company, which is all about organic, teaming up with Scott's Miracle Grow on New Approach PAC to push forward legislation and then start limiting it, which is only going to benefit the corporations in the long run. So this is something really important to be aware of as you sort of look forward to these different sort of initiatives that are happening, statewide initiatives. There's also a Decrim California initiative, which doesn't have anything to do with Decrim Nature. They're teaming up with Beckley Research Institute, which is out of England, which is also a pharma company that just got a $100 million raise. So be really aware of this when you see these different initiatives. Look at who's funding it, figure out what's going on, and kind of go on from there. I'm not sure how much time I have, but now I'm going to talk a little bit about peer support. I'm really excited. Great, perfect. I'm really excited to see what's happening here in Arcata in terms of educational events. This is, I think, the first educational event of Decriminalize Nature Humboldt and also the Arcata Psychedelic Society. Is that correct? Humboldt's Psychedelic Society. Humboldt's the Psychedelic Society. So they're going to watch a beautiful movie tonight. We're going to have speakers and these types of things. And so if you know anybody that wants to engage in this conversation, please reach out to the local community here. I think what's really important as we begin to move this forward is to provide a platform for people who are new to this. We really look at decriminalization as a risk reduction strategy. It's an opportunity for people to come out, talk about their experiences, get the information they need, get the support they need. And those different types of things. Also, what's next on this is the sort of idea of doing integration circles, so peer integration circles, bringing people together, sharing their stories, reducing isolation and alienation, finding ways to hear each other. And one of the benefits is you also get to sort of hear a little bit of everyone's piece of their consciousness, because they're sharing their inner experience, which is really a beautiful thing to hear. We've been doing those for about, like I said, since 2011. We probably run over 100 plus different circles with many, many different people sharing their stories, and it's really an amazing place to be. We all kind of look at it as we're all students of the plants, so we're not really facilitating. We might have a timer, we might give a little intro or whatever, but we're all doing this together. We're all students to the plants, and I think that's a really powerful way to engage in these experiences, because you can then share your own experiences. You can hear from people. There's not a sense of like, oh, I have to be dependent upon this person as a therapist or as a guide, but really that we're all there educating each other, giving each other the tools so that when you go to these circles, you learn some tools. And then if you know somebody that wants to go home and you want to do some integration work with them, you can help them as well. So these types of things are really important as we sort of grow as a larger movement. As I said, this movement's happening across the US. It's really helpful when each of the local communities bring forward their ideas. Probably in the near future, we're going to be passing some local economics / local community-based ceremony work in Oakland, and we would love to team up with the Arcata team and some of the other teams across the U.S. to figure out how to make this work on a grassroots level. And like I said, as we see some of the bigger sort of players that are coming out, it's really important for us to figure out how exactly to do this together. And so I'm not sure how much more time I have, but I will say thank you very much for listening. I couldn't be open for some question and answers as well. Again, I'd like to thank the Arcata team. I'd like to thank Danielle. I'd like to thank this amazing projected movie screen and inflatable screen here. And if you have any questions, go ahead and raise your hand, and I think somebody will take a mic to you, or you can just shout it loudly and I can help answer it. But thank you very much. So, question back there, yeah? Yeah, sure. Well, locally, you can talk to Danielle or any of the folks over here at the table. They have some flyers over there. If you want to follow the local movement for the national side of things, you can go to decriminalizenature.org, which is our website. You can follow us on Instagram or Facebook at Decriminalize Nature, or on Twitter at Decrim Nature. We usually post everything that's going on. There's lots of events happening. Like I said, new things all the time. And then if you want to just reach out, you can either contact us at decrimnature@gmail or decrimnature@protonmail.com. And yeah, we can help you out with that. Are you locally based or? Okay, great. But if you know people in other places, in other cities, we really kind of our process around that is we'll sort of send them out this big handbook that has all the information in it. And then from there, we can help them with, how do you engage with their city council? Let's meet up with your local team, and we just kind of give all the resources we possibly can for them. So it's a great way to connect. Yeah. Yes, sir. Okay, that's good. I can hear you. Sure. Yeah, I mean, that's something that we've had a lot of conversation about. Thank you. The question is basically, how does Decriminalize Nature work with Decrim all drugs? How do they sort of relate to each other? Is that kind of the idea? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So when we started, it was like we had a lot of people telling us you could only do mushrooms, and then you also had the Decrim all drugs policy organizations that have been doing this 20, 30 years that say you're not doing enough. So we're kind of stuck in between these two different positions, right? We, I think, as an organization, are fully behind. We don't think anyone should go to jail for any kind of substance. But we also knew as an organization that we didn't have the educational resources or the infrastructure to help people who need support in these other kind of scenarios, right? So I think, we thought, well, hey, if we decriminalize nature, and we have proven results that these can really help with some of these other things, you're sort of doing this sort of incremental stepping stone to allow people to have a way out before really going to that next level, and see it as a public health issue versus a criminal issue. Another thing about sort of the Decrim all drugs versus Decrim nature is I think, we're not against synthetics, but I don't know how to make LSD or MDMA or any of that kind of stuff, right? But I can grow a plant, or I know someone that can grow a mushroom, or these different types of things. So it was really about empowering local communities to be able to engage in growing their own medicine, which we couldn't really do on the synthetic side of things. So I think that's going to be happening down the road, but those organizations have been doing this for, like I said, 20, 30 years with multi-million-dollar budgets, with a huge volunteer crew. We're kind of skeleton bones and not a huge, don't have a lot of funds, to be able to do this. And we've had a lot of success in 2 years, and they've been doing it for 30 years and haven't had that much success. So I think this is where people are ready at. We have to meet people where they're at. There's a lot of great theory around, yes, we want to do this, but city council members oftentimes aren't ready for it. So we can talk theoretically all day long, but when you sit down with a city council member, if they're like, that's not going to happen here, you got to go with what they're ready for, and nature seems to be the conversation people are ready for. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am. Yeah, sure. So I definitely, I wouldn't say that, you know, I'm not, oh yeah, so basically the question, if I understood it correctly, was talk about unfacilitated groups or unfacilitated groups or unfacilitated ceremonies. And I think there's definitely, I'm not against, and we're definitely not against facilitated with guide, facilitated with space holders, facilitators with ayahuasqueros, people that have long lineages of these practices and that type of thing. I think what we're saying is that it's also okay to do it in community. It's also okay to engage in personal practice. You know, it's also okay to, you know, maybe not be stuck within a context or a dominant worldview that would sort of take away from that experience. You know, if you're in a worldview that somebody doesn't believe in the sacred and you have an experience with them, you know, through these medical models, then, you know, you're kind of dismissing a good portion of the experience because it's just not within that paradigm. So really finding the paradigm that's right for you. And if a guided facilitation is great, then go for it. If you need medical, people are going to do that, okay, great. But what we're really saying is let's expand this and open it up so that everyone has an opportunity to do it in the way that they want to do it and to explore and learn new ways. And I think that's the key right there, is like we're rebuilding culture. So we don't really know what that looks like yet, you know, and we're going to stumble a bit. We're going to take some risks and all that kind of thing, you know, and that's part of the process. But I think at the end of the day, regrowing, rebuilding, empowering each other to be able to sit with each other, because, you know, there's sitters, there's guides, there's facilitators, there's medicine people, there's ayahuasqueros or taitas, you know, there's a different kind of range. Probably any of us can sit with somebody. That means basically like, hey, this person's having an experience and I'm going to make sure if they need water, get some water. I'm going to make sure they don't bump their head. I'm going to make sure they're okay in a good space. There's not really too much context needed there. Facilitators and guides, there's a little bit more of a process. Sometimes that can be challenging though, because sometimes when you're engaging in a conversation with somebody, you don't know what that person is going through, but you're like, oh, you know, I've found some very directive people who do guide work. They're really directing the experience. They don't know what that inner experience is, what's really happening in there. So is that where we want to go? That's called psycholytic versus psychedelic therapy, right? And then so they're talking with the person constantly. And sometimes people can say the wrong thing or get triggered by something and that person doesn't even know on the outside. So let's rebuild, you know? Let's not get stuck in the medical model. Let's not get stuck in the therapeutic model. Let's honor the guides. Let's honor the elders. Let's honor the indigenous traditions. You know, people that have been doing this for a really long time. But find what's right for you. Trust your intuition. You know, do a little bit of homework before you just jump into a ceremony with somebody, because you don't know who it is. You know, and they could be great. There's also people that aren't that great. So I think this is part of the process. So I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah. Great. Yes, Jake. Okay. Anyone else with a question? One more question before we wrap it up? No? Oh, yes, sir. In terms of the movement? Yeah, I would say Arcata, because I'm here. I'm watching Fantastic Fungi with you all, right? No, I think you are really, you'll be the next city kind of on the docket if you are all but passed on September 1st, which is amazing. And you did it so quickly and you know, with integrity and bringing in really great speakers and testimonials, and I think that's really beautiful. Then after that, I'll be heading over to Ann Arbor in September they're doing like an Entheo Fest there. And like I said, there's a lot of action happening in Michigan, so I think Michigan after that will be pretty exciting. And then I think, you know, we've got some wins on the West Coast, we've got some wins on the East Coast, we've got some wins on the Fresh Coast, the Great Lakes, you know, the Fresh Coast. It would be nice to see kind of some wins in the Great Plains, because I think that all these, you know, it's really easy for someone to dismiss this and say, oh, well, Oakland's a progressive town. Arcata, it's beautiful plaza. Of course, Arcata's going to pass, right? You know, Ann Arbor, Michigan, that's a college town. They've had a $5 fine for cannabis since the 70s. You know, it's when decriminalized a long time ago. So people are able to say, oh, the rate is off, right? But then you have like a Grand Rapids, which is a conservative town, or you have a Washington, D.C., which is progressive, but not really something that you would expect, right? And to have some of those Great Plains areas really open up the conversation, you get news and different, so there's like multiple layers to what we're doing. We're changing policy. Second thing we're doing is we're kind of subverting authority, right? Because we're having the authority figures say these are healing, and the community hears that, and now they're more willing to explore, because some people won't ever do anything if it's against the law. Right? But as soon as an authority figure says, yes, I believe these are also healing, now they're going to go and sort of explore it a little bit more, do a little bit more research, right? And then sort of after that, it's like getting news into different locales that we can't get it to. You You know, when we passed in Oakland, we weren't getting news at the same place as Ann Arbor when they passed, or when Boston, or the cities around Boston passed. It gets news in new places. So this is really an expansion of sort of the grassroots power dynamic. And so the more and more we get this conversation going, the more and more we get it in the news, the more and more we talk to people about it, the more and more we share about the importance of these plant medicines. That's really what it's all about. You know, it's nice to pass resolutions. It's nice to be able to change policy, but really it's about getting the word out about plants and fungi. So I think that's where we're at, and that's what I'm excited about right now. Yeah. All right, so I think that's the last question, and I think Jen is coming up next, but Daniel, great. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Larry.